guess really, the reason why I wanted to chat with you is over the last 6 months, I think we would probably both agree that the incidents, I should say, and severity of security incidents and breaches, etc., at least from my perspective, has really kind of gotten out of control. And I don't foresee it getting any better, quite frankly. You may have a different perspective. So, in your background and your experience and your job, what do you think has been, if you want to call it causes or cause of why we're seeing the increase in incidents like we're seeing today? What do you think brings that about?
Well, there's a lot of different layers to that. So I guess the first thing, we've seen over the past 10 years or so this increased use of technologies, right? So, we went from, now this is really dating myself, but we went from old rotary phones and newspapers and jumped up to personal computers in everybody's home. And, as time moves on, we've gotten to the point where everybody has a personal computer in their pocket. They have a lot of access to the internet. They have, cameras that's built into your cell phone. And, along with that, despite the best efforts of all those that are in the industry, one of the big issues that comes with that is understanding the responsibilities of having that phone, of having 9,000 different web accounts, and the understanding of what it actually takes to secure these things, and why that's important. That's a huge piece of it, because I can honestly say that, I've talked to clients that, say maybe 5 or 10 years ago, I would go through, do a technology audit and make recommendations. And when they saw that, they're thinking, oh, okay, this is just a computer guy trying to sell me stuff, or I don't understand all these different layers of technology and why I want to have that. I've got my antivirus, I'm good to go. And as time goes on, I think on the criminal level, they have exponentially grown in skills and utilization of technologies, and it's made it so much easier for them to go through and exploit these folks and these businesses that are kind of, I don't want to say stuck in a certain year, but are kind of still operating under the same premise of, oh, okay, I have my antivirus on my computer, I'm good to go. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Things have gotten so much more advanced, not only just from the digital side of things, but the different exploitable areas.
Sure.
So we're talking, human interaction itself. Social media is a gigantic one, and people aren't really tying in that, oh, okay, these little questionnaires that you see that come up on a Facebook post from a friend that says, did you ever play a game, or did you ever purchase something, or do you remember this? Well, that little morsel of information kind of leads to a piece of information about you, right, stating, well, if you went to school and you used a typewriter, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be in this age subset, because there's not necessarily a definite time frame, but you can take that little piece and start adding those pieces together to form a profile of anybody that's out there.
You make a really good point, and I think about the amount of data that's out there and the amount of data that we give up so easily each and every day, and the idea that 5 years ago, logos used to be fuzzy and spelling was really bad and grammar was really bad. And when we take a look at some of the emails, especially phishing emails that go out today, not only are they incredibly complicated, but they are very authentic looking and sounding.
Absolutely.
It's not like anything like it had been in the past. So, recently there have been a number of surveys that have gone out and studies and results that have come back, and they talk about, the three areas that people really need to pay attention to. So you've got security awareness training. What are we doing about the weakest link? The person behind the keyboard, incident response planning, and then finally third-party vendor management. Because third-party vendor management obviously is another really exploding area for these types of security incidents, which may eventually become a breach. So from your perspective, what I really wanted to kind of dive into today is the whole world of incident response planning. So, I think when I talk to people, sometimes they confuse it and they say, well, I have a disaster recovery plan, or I have a business continuity plan. So as a practitioner, as somebody who's in the field already, what's your definition of an incident response plan, but why and how is it different than the other plans that a really strong IT group needs to have in place?
So let me start with a short story on this. So when I moved to my current job, I had spent roughly 5 years in a manufacturing industry doing IT work, but it was for a dual set of plants. Those plants had spent a ton of time and effort into securing their environment, making sure that there's backups, doing multiple layers of security, and making sure there's stability and integrity of all of the data that they use day in and day out. So as far as the day-to-day operations go, roughly if the plants were down, I believe the figure was somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 per 15 minutes that they would lose if the plants were down. So I moved on, and roughly 2 weeks later, they got hit with ransomware. And what that did to them is I had moved on. They had not hired somebody new. It was a very small IT team, and we all kind of were jacks of all trades. So we had our own specialties, but nobody really knew or understood all of the ins and outs of everything that they had developed over the 5 years that I had been there, with the exception of one or two people. And even at that, it was just kind of a glancing understanding of, oh, okay, he's doing something with servers, or, that kind of thing. So I move on. Roughly 2.5 weeks later, I get a call from one of the folks in the C-suite, and they say, hey, we have been hit with ransomware. We've been down for roughly a week and a half. Now keep in mind, $8,000 every 15 minutes. They have been totally down. They have not been able to produce. And, I talked to the gentleman, and when I got on site, I had learned that basically the company had been purchased 2 years prior, and they were doing a huge transition over into the parent company and getting all of their infrastructure and all of that stuff in. Well, the parent company had a global presence. So they had plants all over the place. And I think they had probably upwards of 50 or so plants. One of those plants got hit with ransomware, went through the network, and then it started spreading to all of the other plants.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't recall how many plants actually went down from this, but it was quite a few. So I get a phone call from somebody in the C-suite. They say, hey, we need your help. Are you available? Of course, I cleared it and all that good stuff, and I went and I looked. And as soon as I got there, one of my coworkers was there, and he said, "Hey, I need you to do X, Y, Z." And they just kind of said, "Okay, before we get into that, let's get a good overview of what's going on, what's down, what needs to come back up, and start prioritizing these things. And what have you done up to this point?" Well, one of the key components of, obviously, of any successful recovery from that is backups. Well, there wasn't a good solid understanding or document or procedure of how to come up from all of the backups, how to tie them all back together, and how to move that process forward so that it would reduce downtime and be efficient and reduce error. So I walk in there, and none of the backups had even been taken. He was starting from scratch. And, coming from his position, I don't blame him, because he wasn't in charge of all of that.
Right.
And there was no documentation on how, in a specific instance, is there a sequence of things that need to happen in order to bring up all of these systems and all of the ancillary systems that have dependencies on maybe one key system, or all of these data feeds be able to go into an overall platform the business can function. So I went in, did the stuff that I could do to get them up and going, and they were back up and running, we'll say roughly another 2.5 weeks or so after that, by the time they got everything all squared away. And there were some other things that went on too. So with all of that, if there had been a practiced and solid incident response, they would have been able to walk through that, pull that paper out or pull that document out and say, "Oh, okay, so in order to bring this up, we need to start the virtual environment, see what's on there. Then we need to start pulling from backup these servers. Then from there, we need to start making sure there's communications." It's just all these different steps. And that is just from the IT side of things. From what I was told and what I understand, that first 2 weeks must have been just atrocious, because it didn't just affect IT. It affected manufacturing on the floor. It affected the equipment. It affected HR and marketing. It affected the sales representatives that were out in the field. It affected all these different logistical and supply chain components, to the point where they actually had to shut the plants completely down, because there was such a backlog of all these different moving pieces of the business that all had a foundational use of the tools that IT would support or would provide to them, to the point where they had trucks that were backed up for 3.5 miles that were there to do scheduled deliveries, but they couldn't receive them because they didn't have a way to receive them in. So the raw materials were all out of whack, and they couldn't figure any of that stuff out. So again, from the IT standpoint, that's a huge, huge thing. You can have a disaster recovery component and a document that's written out, and that will certainly help you bring up a server or servers in just that little piece. But when you're talking about incident response, it's not a piece. Yes, there's pieces of that, but it should be kind of a blend of disaster recovery, business continuity, and then how to respond to an event for all those facets of the business. And the incident recovery part is what really helps tie all of those different components and make sure that the thought and the planning has been put in place in order to be successful and efficient to bring all of those components back. And also on the PR side of things, in that instance, we're just doing production, that kind of thing, but they have some very big customers. So all of a sudden one morning, the sales guy that's wherever he may be out in the middle of nowhere can't get into his computer. He's got a great big meeting with one of his clients. He doesn't have access to the things that he needs to show them. So now he has to either rearrange his schedule or try and talk through in front of the client, hey, we're having an issue, we need to reschedule, we need to do whatever. Well, from a client standpoint, that might not give them a warm and fuzzy feeling.
Sure.
And that's just one little piece of the puzzle. So incident response tied in with a business continuity plan will help each one of those components of the business be able to react to an incident and be able to handle it appropriately. And it gets the people thinking about, okay, what do I need to do if my computer or my database or my whatever is down? How do I function? How do I do my job? And how do I keep the business going?
Well, I think that the key part of the story that you share is that there really is a complete and total dependence on information technology in the workspace today. It doesn't matter if you're talking about operations or sales or marketing or HR or what have you, that we are so dependent upon technology. We're so dependent upon technology to be connected to our vendors as well as our customers that this whole idea of building an incident response plan really has to take into consideration a lot of different stakeholders. You know, we can't believe that, well, an incident response plan is just IT's responsibility. It may be IT's responsibility to spearhead the effort, but I think you would probably agree that you have to make sure that you've got the right people sitting at the table that come from all of these different stakeholder groups that are going to have an active role. You know, when you start talking about, you know, kicking one off, do you have internal and external counsel involved? Do you have a cyber insurance company involved? If you have to do forensics investigation, who's going to do that kind of work? Who's going to be responsible for pulling the trigger and say, you know, this security incident has now really evolved into an actual breach? Because I think you would agree, not every security incident is a reportable breach. So I think that's really important. So again, from your experience as a practitioner, you know, my next question would be, why don't more people, because I can tell you in going out and dealing either with our current customers or from a prospecting perspective, that there are still so many organizations out there that do not have a well-documented incident response plan. And the other thing I find that's really weak is if they do in fact have an incident response plan, they don't test it on an annual basis. They kind of have it on a shelf and they check a box and all that kind of jazz. So why do you think it is that more people don't have an incident response plan in place today?
We're busy. I really think that's a big component of it. So obviously there's more variables to that, but I think the first one, the big one, is it's busy. We've all, as a culture, we have gotten into the habit of, you know, checking the box. So if I check the box, I can move on, I've done my job, I'm good to go. But what I think that is missed is just because you check the box doesn't mean it's actually handled necessarily the way it should be, or has taken into, think of the word here. They really thought through or had the time to think through, okay, if X happens, you know, what are the next steps? What's Y, what's Z, you know, and on down through. And
Sure.
the realization, without taking the time to actually walk through that, you don't know. You can guess, you can hypothesize, but you actually have no idea truly how something could take off and explode, and get a good solid understanding of, well, okay, I've got, you know, my servers are coming up and all that's great, but, you know, this end of the business is doing whatever, and that end of the business is doing whatever, and they're all scrambling and they're doing it off the cuff. So you don't have time to put thought into it to decide, oh, well, maybe it would be better for my clients to make this adjustment instead of having really thought about it and realizing, oh, wait, maybe we shouldn't send a notification about this because we don't actually know what we've got going on. Or one of the biggest things that I've run into is, okay, we have some sort of an incident. How do you define that? That incident is, could be, okay, I've got a bunch of logins for this one account. Well, does that mean you call the FBI saying I have a bunch of logins on one account?
Right.
No.
Right.
It means it needs to be investigated. It needs to be categorized. And then from there, you can decide, well, this is actually affecting a bunch of things. Now I have computers starting to drop. Well, there needs to be a sequence of events that happens with that. And then once you have that, your processes are huge when it comes to dealing with those things. So if you have a very small IT team, and it's a Friday afternoon and the IT person is just sitting there going to town, everything's good, half the company is maybe out or away or just doing whatever, and he sees a blip and he's distracted, he gets a call from somebody downstairs, sees a blip, and it doesn't register immediately, and there may not be multiple layers of security behind him to help him or her to help support identification of these things. That blip may come and it may go.
So Cliff,
okay,
let me do this. Let me put you on the spot.
Yep.
So we've known each other for a few years. You were kind enough to invite me to a meeting with your peers and talk about IT security. So how long have you been in the IT profession?
I will be coming up on 17 years pretty quick.
Okay, so 17 years. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never gone into any IT organization and found extra people kind of hanging around looking for stuff to do. I think everybody's busy, including you. You're a busy guy. So you've been an IT professional for coming up on 17 years, and you're a busy guy. And one of the things that you pointed to on why people don't build out incident response plans is because they're busy. So I know that you recently did it. So why did you build out your own incident response plan? Why did you do it?
The main reason why we all chose to do this is because there are approximately 3 people in the IT department where I work now. Each one of those people has specializations and we kind of back each other up. But because of that, and because we're all so busy, we in a sense kind of get into a silo or a trench where we do our thing, and when something comes up that's kind of outside of our lane, we'll reach out and certainly talk to somebody that maybe may have a little bit better of a grasp on something or know why it was implemented. I believe that the knitting between all 3 of us and getting on the same page of how to handle a situation is absolutely critical, because you can have me that's maybe really involved in the IRP. Well, that's great, but that doesn't really help because I know it all. I need the other 3 people, or the other 2 or 3 people, to be able to have at least a pretty good understanding of it and know where the document is and have a refresher of, oh, okay, yeah, I remember we all sat down, we talked about this. This is the document that we need to utilize. We hashed this out together, so here's the plan. This is how we're going to move forward. And that is critical.
Okay. So when you think about the next time you meet with your peer group and they're talking about, it could be security awareness training and IRP, third-party vendor management, whatever it may be, what advice would you give to your peer group about having an incident response plan, especially when they come back, maybe over coffee or whatever, and they're like, yeah, Cliff, that's really great, man, but I'm busy. I'm a one-person shop. I don't have the time. We got a lot going on. I mean, what advice would you share with them?
I would start by saying, go in your office and turn off your computer and try and work the rest of the day.
Okay.
It's that simple. If you don't have the tools and the understanding in how to proceed, then what do you do? Well, if you don't have an IRP plan, okay, that's great. You don't have an IRP plan, but now you're shooting from the hip. And what happens if the CEO walks in and says, hey, the whole system's down, and you have every single director or manager or whatever that's beating down your door. They're all hitting you with questions at the same time. They're all coming from different avenues, and I'm on vacation. Or, some of the other senior folks are on vacation. That's not going to be a very good day. And you don't want to have the deer in headlights look to you while you're trying to figure this out. You need to say, I'm getting the incident response plan. Let's get the team together, and we're going to start working through this, and we will have answers for you as soon as possible, and actually start working through that. Because you've already taken the time to sit and plan and talk to all the departments that you may need to incorporate into this, and they all say, that'll kind of be a trigger for them of, oh, wait, they're pulling the incident response plan out. Something's going on. I need to do X, Y, Z for my department to make sure they're up and running. So that helps bolster the business overall. Just because everybody has their piece, they can actually get started on what they need to do. And they can do it without making mistakes of just trying to figure something out right off the top.
What would you suggest to somebody as the next, 1, 2, or 3 steps that they should take if they're serious about, what, Cliff, you're right. It's been on my list for the last couple of years. I'm finally going to get to it. What's the steps that somebody should take if they're really serious now and they want to get this thing kicked off? Like they really want to put a plan that's not cookie cutter, that's a template that they got free from somebody, but they can really kind of march through this thing and be successful.
Look at your current workload and figure out avenues or ways that you can adjust that to allow you the time that you will need. And it's not a ton of time. There are components to it that take some time, but you have to be able to dedicate some time to it. That's the first thing. Once you figure that out and get a good time set for you and maybe your team, the next step would be talk to anybody that's going to be involved. Let them know ahead of time of, hey, there's an initiative that we're going to start doing. It's called the IRP. This is what it's for. It's not going to necessarily involve anything really time critical at this point. There will be some components that you will have to contribute to, but this is coming. And in order to get the buy-in for it, that's the $1 million question. A lot of organizations may not feel that spending the resources on this is the highest priority.
Right.
And I understand that. There has to be a priority for it somewhere at some point. And, part of a successful cybersecurity approach, I truly believe, is layers upon layers. It's the spider web. You cannot do it with just having an antivirus that's sitting on your computer. You have to have multiple layers. This is a layer. This is just as important as having a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan. And it's not important because you need to check a box and hand it to the auditor and say, yes, we have it. It's important because you need and have a responsibility to do your part in order to keep the business up and running. If you can't do that, there are other people that need to be able to do that, and you need to find a way to help support that. Because ultimately, if the business crashes, you don't have a paycheck. You don't have a job. And it can get that bad in a matter of hours. It really can.
In closing, is there anything else that you would want to share with a peer group? And it could even be outside of an incident response plan, but anything from, again, from your experience as a practitioner, as we continue to kind of go through the remainder of this year and then in the next year, that you would want them to be either considering or working on in order to improve their overall security posture?
I think the biggest thing is review what you have. Review where you are, get an understanding of where that is, and compare it to where the rest of the world is. Because as you all know, we hear about it constantly. Oh, cybersecurity trends are up, or this is changing and that's changing. Well, It is, and it has been. However, it has been changing exponentially, and there's so many different avenues that it's changing on. It's really, really hard to keep up. So I would definitely suggest using something like there's a group out there called CIS. They produce a standard set of best practices. Use that as a comparison tool. See if your processes even are covering, do I have antivirus? Do I have passwords that are complex? To use that as your starting point. And if I remember correctly, there are avenues that you can go through to get all of that information and tools as well for free.
Yeah.
So, do some research. And if nothing else, get started on that. Set aside an hour or so for a week or two and do the research, and then start getting an understanding of where you are. And then that'll start to tell you, oh, I'm really, really good, or oh, I maybe have a lot of gaps that I need to fill. And that will start you on the path of knowing where you need to go.
Cliff, I appreciate you taking time. It's always great to chat with you. Looking forward to seeing you next week. And I really appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.